Cicilline, a top member of the House Judiciary Committee, which would write articles of impeachment. Congressman, Democrats on the Judiciary Committee met this weekend. Is the plan at this point to vote out articles of impeachment against President Trump by the end of this week?
Well, Mike, I don't think we know, Chris, I don't think we know the timing of it, but certainly the Judiciary Committee will hear from the Intelligence Committee counsel, who will detail that the President of the United States attempted to coerce a foreign leader to interfere in an American presidential election, to assist him in his reelection, undermining the national security of the United States for his own benefit. This is a classic example of an impeachable offense. We know that from the scholars we listen to. So we're going to receive the evidence carefully. We're going to evaluate that evidence as it applies to the law that is set forth in the Constitution and make a judgment about what articles of impeachment. But the timetable, I think, is less clear.
You talk about evidence. Will the committee focus just on the alleged offenses in terms of what the president did in Ukraine? Or will you go back, as some Democrats are talking about, to the Mueller report and what it alleged about potential obstruction of justice by President Trump in the Russia investigation, a subject which has not been discussed at all during the last few months, really hasn't been discussed in Congress at all since last July when Robert Mueller testified?
Well, the Judiciary Committee has collected an enormous amount of evidence, both in its own work and now, of course, in the receipt of a 300-page report from the Intelligence Committee. I think it will demonstrate and does demonstrate a pattern of behavior by this president to seek foreign assistance in interfering in an American presidential election, and then an effort to obstruct Congress's review of those circumstances. So we'll look at all the material that we've collected, all of the evidence that has been generated, and we'll make a judgment. But again, the focus is on the president's misconduct, the president of the United States asking a foreign government to interfere in an American presidential election. This really is what our founders spoke about when they were speaking about impeachment, about an abuse of power, about using the power of the presidency to advance your own personal or political interests ahead of the national interest. This is, and so I think,
just
again,
to answer my question, though.
Sure.
If you could just answer my question, is it going to be just on Ukraine, or may you look back at the Russia probe and potential obstruction of justice there?
Look, I think all of the potential articles of impeachment are on the table. That will be a decision that the Judiciary Committee makes in consultation with the chairs of the relevant committees and obviously with the leadership of the House. But the Judiciary Committee will have all the evidence and will make a judgment, and that the decision will be made by the committee at the appropriate time.
As part of the Intelligence Committee's report earlier this week, Chairman Adam Schiff released phone logs of telephone calls between Rudy Giuliani, or one of his associates, with the chair, or rather the top Republican, the former chair of the House Intel Committee, Devin Nunes, and also with the reporter, John Solomon. Republicans are pushing back hard on what Adam Schiff did. Here they are.
I've never seen a chairman of a committee abuse their subpoena power to go after other members of Congress that they have political disagreements with, or members of the press that they have political disagreements with. That's over the line.
Congressman, is that the new if I may ask the question first, is that the new standard that members of Congress can subpoena phone records and then release them about members of Congress from the other party or members of the media? Because that takes us into pretty dangerous territory.
Look, the Intelligence Committee has the solemn responsibility of collecting evidence relevant to the impeachment inquiry, all the evidence, and they use lawful process to do that. The real question is, why is the Republican ranking member of the Intelligence Committee engaged in a conversation with Les Parnas and others, and why is he participating in some way in the very subject matter of this inquiry? That's the really alarming development. And so the committee has a responsibility to collect all the evidence and to carefully evaluate it, to use lawful process to do it. And I wish my Republican colleagues were as concerned about evidence collection and what the evidence showed rather than the embarrassment to one of their colleagues.
But you know, once you open this door, everybody's going to go through it. So when the Republicans are in the majority, you have no problem with them subpoenaing your phone records and finding out who you've been in touch with?
I think it is important that a committee of jurisdiction collect all of the relevant evidence, particularly when we're focused on something as deadly serious as an impeachment proceeding. This is a serious proceeding. We have a responsibility to collect all the evidence, whatever it is, evaluate it, apply the constitutional provisions. And when you do that, you understand that the president's continuing is really a continuous threat to our elections, to the integrity of our democracy, and we have to move forward with these proceedings. No one runs for Congress to impeach a president, but we are faced with a very, very serious set of misconduct by this president. We have a responsibility to honor our oath of office, to protect and defend the Constitution. We simply cannot allow this president or any president to invite foreign interference in our elections. You know who gets to decide our elections? The American people, the citizens of this country, not any foreign power. That's what separates our great country from authoritarian countries all over the world.
Congressman, some moderate Democrats, especially some who were elected in swing districts that Donald Trump carried in 2016, are talking openly about voting against impeachment if it gets to the House floor. As a member of Democratic House leadership, are you sure that the Democrats now have the 216 votes they would need to impeach this president?
I think there is no question that the evidence that has been developed during the course of this investigation or this inquiry is overwhelming and uncontested, that the President of the United States sought foreign interference to help in his reelection.
Congressman, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to interrupt you there. I'm not talking about the evidence. I'm talking about, do you have the votes?
And I fully expect that the vast majority of the members of Congress from the Democratic caucus will accept that evidence and will move forward with articles of impeachment. The real question is, why is the party of Ronald Reagan that prevailed in the Cold War willing to accept this kind of foreign interference in our elections?
Finally, the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, issues his report tomorrow and on the Russia probe, and he reportedly finds that the FBI had adequate cause to pursue that investigation. He apparently finds serious misconduct, even perhaps criminal activity on the part of some lower-level people, but he says that the top leadership of the FBI and other agencies were not guided by political bias. Do you expect that to end the debate over whether or not the FBI was spying on the Trump campaign in 2016, as Attorney General Barr contends?
Well, you would hope that it would finally end this kind of silly claim that has been made repeatedly by the president and his allies. The report is going to say the FBI was fully justified in its investigation of the Trump campaign. But sadly, we have seen before that facts sometimes don't matter, that they stand in the way of these arguments that they're making in an attempt to defend the president's grave misconduct. So I hope it puts an end to it once and for all, but we'll have to see.
Congressman Cicilline, thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll track developments in your committee this week. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Up next, we'll bring in our